Hello, good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to CAMLIS 2023. I'm Lauren Deason. I'm one of our co-chairs this year for the conference, and I'll pass it over to Sagar.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sagar Samtani. I am one of the co-chairs for the conference as well. Welcome to CAMLIS 2023. Really excited to be here. Before we get started, there's a few things that we'd like to go ahead and talk about at the beginning of the session. So first, a big round of thank yous to a sets of people. Number one, Sands Capital for allowing us to use this venue for 3 years in a row. It's unbelievable to me that we get to see this incredible view around us and to have such an incredible ability to network outside in the cafe and others as well. So please do take advantage of that, of this area, and please do be respectful of this area as well, because it is a live working office area as well. Big thank you to the volunteers as well. There's a whole bunch of student volunteers that are around and other volunteers that came in bright and early this morning to get everything set up. So big thank you to them as well. Big thank you to all of our sponsors who have sponsored this event, and some of sponsors who have been recurring sponsors over the last few years as well. We really appreciate the support, and the support goes a long way in helping out and getting this conference up and running and making sure that everything is going smoothly and fairly. And then finally, a big thank you to our speakers. We have an amazing lineup of talks here today that I think everybody will find really enjoyable. And the talks are grouped into sessions that are set up to be very topically themed. So Ethan Rudd, raise your hand, please. He did an amazing job setting up the program here today, and I'm sure you all will enjoy it very, very much. And we brought back some really exciting things from CAMLIS's past, including a poster session, which will give us great opportunity to network as well. So I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Lauren for some logistics to consider throughout the day here today.
Okay, thanks, Sagar. So as he mentioned, it's an active workspace, so please be respectful. The bathrooms are located just down the hall this way. Let's see, for lunch today so we're going to have an amazing keynote speaker followed by the first session, and then we're going to have lunch at Assembly, which is it's a food hall that's basically just across the street when you exit this building, and we'll give you more detailed directions just before lunch, but it's very close by. Throughout the conference, we have the Slack that you should be able to find in an email that you received this morning or on the website. So if you haven't signed up yet for the Slack channel, please do. That's where we're going to be conducting all of the questions for the speakers, in addition to the live questions here. But for anyone watching the live stream, please put your questions in the Slack channel, and we will read them out loud for the speakers to answer. Let's see. Yes, please do. The Wi-Fi password. Yes, I think it's on the other holding screen that might reappear in a moment, but it is I am the machine. Capital I, capital M. And I was like, I don't actually know that reference, so I felt like I should do it in some kind of like voice, like I am the machine. I don't know if that's if that's the correct way to pronounce it, but it's an easy one to remember. And I think it's SC conference is the Wi-Fi network. Oh, there it is. Perfect. All right, so thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited. Like Sagar said, we have an amazing lineup of talks and the poster session and happy hour later today, which will allow us to enjoy the gorgeous rooftop that we're lucky enough to get to enjoy from this building. So with that, I will pass it over to Hiram, one of our founders.
Thank you, Lauren and Keegan. I'd like to introduce our Thursday keynote today. It's my honor to introduce Shawn Richardson. Shawn is the Director of Cyber Defense Operations at NVIDIA, where she leads the Product Security Operations Center and Incident Response teams. Shawn represents the old guard in incident response for over 2 decades. She has shaped product security and incident response at companies like Microsoft, Palo Alto Networks, and Amazon. And in that time, she's witnessed and shaped a lot in security. In earlier days at Microsoft, she was present when 50 CISOs very vocally complained to Steve Ballmer about their security challenges with software, which established a new security-focused emphasis at Microsoft. In incident response, she served as an incident commander and famously presided over what is now called The Only Patch Tuesday That Never Shipped. But before all this, Shawn actually dreamed of a far different career. She really wanted to be a wild animal veterinarian and spent her early years at a marine laboratory and aquarium in sunny Sarasota, Florida. There she found herself knee-deep, as it were, in an entirely different kind of incident response that included crawling inside manatee tanks to handle far more tangible and aromatic animal incidents. Shawn is an example of someone who is invested in developing our community. She served as a board member for First.org, an international organization that brings together incident response and security teams from countries across the world to ensure a safe internet for everybody. She continues as a contributor to several industry special interest groups. Shawn's remarkable career is a good reminder that no matter what detours you find in your life and your career, there's power in the adage, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Indeed, I'm certain that Shawn stands in rare company in claiming this remarkable accomplishment summarized by this chat GPT-assisted rhyming triplet. She's patched a CVE, she's served her community, and she's tickled a manatee. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Shawn Richardson.
That was great. Right. Get everything set up here. Good morning, CAMLIS. Oh. How many West Coast folks do I have in the house? A special thank you to you for coming and being up at dark 30 on your time. Thank you so much. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth a little bit and driving the camera people nuts because I've got my notes over here, but I like to wander. When I first got approached to do this keynote, I have to admit, I stopped and asked, why would they want me to come speak? I'm new to AI, but as Hiram mentioned, I've been doing security and incident response for many years. But I kind of thought about it and I talked to some folks, and it occurred to me that over the years of sometimes hard-earned lessons, I've seen a pattern, almost a framework, if you will, about how to prepare for security and incident response in new technologies, kind of like AI. So I'm here today to talk to you, not as an AI expert, but as somebody who's worked in incident response and been in the trenches for a long time. I do understand that most of the rest of the talks for today are going to be about all the incredible work that you all are doing using AI and machine learning to keep us safer. Please keep going. It's great. NVIDIA is doing similar work as well. But again, I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about the other side of that, is how we're preparing to keep the things you're using safe and secure so you can keep doing what you're doing. So, and with that, let me just do a little, there we go, it actually worked. We'll make sure we get the notes up so we're all good. Quick background on me. I've spent most of my career looking for failure modes and trying to figure out how to address them. It started when I was a vet tech for an animal ophthalmologist. Yes, an animal eye doctor, they exist. And volunteering at Moat Marine, as Hiram mentioned. And it was always kind of interesting because whether it was a sick animal or a stranded wild beast coming in, it was like they were their own little black box. You know, its cat can't tell you how it scratched its eye. Sea turtle can't tell you that it swallowed a plastic bag instead of a jellyfish. But both animals come in and you have to figure out what's wrong with them and how do you fix the problem. For a lot of things, especially in the wild animal field, there's no, oh, hey, your sea turtle ate a bag. Here's what you do for that. So a lot of it was experimentation and trying to figure things out. When I made the transition into tech, I had several jobs at the beginning of my career that really prepared me for this doomsday destruction that people are worried about called AI. I started working at Microsoft on a centralized beta program for security. So any of the security programs, any of the security features that were going out went through this beta place to make sure it would actually work and not break things. I started working in Windows security. That was kind of interesting. The goal there was to find all the bugs you could as quickly as possible before you shipped. keeping in mind that as you got closer and closer to that ship date, the bar to fix things got higher and higher. I do believe I own the record of having the last bug that went into Windows 7, which either shows my tenacity or my age. I'm not quite sure which. I then took a little brief journey over to Amazon, working in compliance payments. But I would spend my lunch hour going through the previous day's transactions to look for fraud. I then went back to Microsoft, where I worked in Bing security on ads. But I also had the dubious honor of, how do we politely say this? The objectionable materials queen. For those of you who are familiar with Rule 34, so am I. For those of you who aren't, don't look it up. I then went into the Microsoft Security Response Center. I will say that's probably the most intense 4.5, 5 years of my career. The breadth and depth of products and services that this one team covered, and the types of attacks we saw were just amazing. Not to mention it moved fast, really fast. So fast, in fact, that I once made a mistake and zero-dayed Microsoft and caused a repatch for Internet Explorer. My apologies, if you were aware. It was so bad, in fact, even my own mother noticed. Why am I having to do this patch again, Shawn? Mother, I messed up. I'm sorry. Anyway, today I am honored to be a director of cyber operations at NVIDIA. Incident response for all of our products, services, hardware, firmware, all fall under our teams. And we work incredibly hard and incredibly fast to make sure it all stays as secure as possible. So basically, I've spent my career dealing in bad news. So I'm the kind of person, if you're having a bad day, come sit by me and we can share in all the gloom and doom. So with that, I want to share a couple of things that I've learned over the years. I know, great. Thanks, Shawn. People panic, really? Thanks, Shawn. That's water wet news at 11. But if you think about it for a minute, almost every new technology starts with panic. Remember when cell phones with cameras came out? People were completely freaked out that, oh my goodness, people are going to be taking inappropriate pictures everywhere. What are we going to do? And while those things do occasionally happen, it's not the rampant, destruction of society that we expected it to be. Think about online banking. We send pictures of our checks to banks and everything works just fine. Even my parents use this. And how many of you've got a smartwatch on your wrist this morning? Yeah. Think about all of the health information, location data, privacy implications on your wrist. I wouldn't buy one at first because I was a little nervous about it. But now you'll notice I have 2 watches on. All I'm saying is that things that we are normally nervous about do tend to become part of our everyday lives. And I'm sure you all have seen all the headlines. Obviously, the end of the world is coming. We have technologists and government folks concerned, saying we should slow down, we should stop. And I think most of us would agree, probably the cat's already out of the bag at this point. There's really no slowing down. And in fact, even if we were to try and do that, most of the malicious folks aren't going to stop. So why give them the head start? Just not worth it. And I'm sure a lot of you have concerned relatives. How many of you, when they hear you work in AI, ask if you're trying to bring about the end of humanity as we know it? I'm a member of a podcast group where we listen to something and on Monday nights we chat about it. And we've had a couple of discussions on AI. And the number of people who start asking me about the singularity, the fact that technology could get ahead of us and kill us, it is real. I mean, smart people are concerned about this. Hopefully no one in this room. But people are always going to panic. Bad news gets the clicks. So there's always going to be hype. The trick with hype, just don't buy into it, but be prepared for it. You think about some of the things we're seeing right now. The self-inflicted harms. I'm going to type awful things into this large language model until it spits out something horrific and I'm going to put it in my blog. Okay. I've seen the one. I've watched some of your talks, by the way. I went back and looked at some of these. I loved the one where it was is this a cat or is this a truck? And, you can teach the machine to, basically see a truck when there's a cat. But we've always had problems with our visual as humans. Think about, was it 2015 when there was the whole drama about the dress? Is it white and gold or is it black and blue? I mean, people had fights over this. We were all looking at the same picture, but we all saw something a little bit different. The theoretical attacks. This happens all the time. You have something new comes out and, oh my God, look at what you can do if you're wearing purple on a Tuesday and you circle around to the left. We've seen this before. I remember, I think it was 2014, there was a vulnerability paper that came out on something called Rowhammer. Anybody familiar with Rowhammer? Couple. It basically a vulnerability in DRAM that could lead to elevation of privilege and do some bad stuff. It was new, it's novel, and it took about 6 to 9 months. And I think it was Google that came out with the first proofs of concept of this potential based off of this paper. People panicked. Incident response teams were like, oh my God, how am I going to fix this? But the reality of what happened is that we've seen a couple things come out, but we're not having rampant Rowhammer attacks yet. It's not to say it's not going to happen, but we're getting ahead of this. The industry's already looking at ways that we're going to mitigate. It's probably going to require some architectural changes to happen, but this is what we do as security people. The new threat comes in and we learn how to address it. And then the cool stuff, I love this. You think about like the drones that are delivering packages in different places, the autonomous vehicles. When I was living in California, there's like 4 or 5 different companies and those vehicles just roaming around the place. I always got a little nervous and wanted to make sure somebody was actually driving them. But these are not widespread yet. They're not all over the place. They're not all over the country, but there's some interesting things coming out of it. So what should we really be concerned about? Well, plenty. There's a lot of possibilities of things that could go possibly wrong, as the late, great Dan Kaminsky used to say. You think, for example, I was talking about the autonomous vehicles. And you think about, can I make a funny move and freak the car out? Can I draw it in a little circle and it doesn't know it can move? Can I mess with a traffic sign and it misreads it? Kind of like that dress earlier. Yeah, that's all possible. And then you think about lowering barriers to entry. With the new technologies that are coming out in AI and machine learning, it's allowing less experienced hackers to create more sophisticated attacks in less time. Wow, we've basically made efficient hackers. Great. But the flip side of that is people who are not as sophisticated in securing their networks are now going to be able to secure their ecosystem more and make it safer for all of us. Again, this is nothing new. We've seen all this before. Any new technology that comes out that helps the intended user, it's going to help the malicious user as well. Nothing unusual here. Proliferation. Oh, I'm so glad I was able to get that word out with only 2 cups of coffee. I don't know about y'all, but I'm seeing it everywhere. Oh my God, everything's got AI. Every version of a browser has got a co-pilot or something. It seems like everybody's just sprinkling everything with AI goodness. The only thing that bothers me about that is probably down the road when we have our first big incident, it's not going to be just one technology that gets hit, but all of them based on that. But then we'll all be in it together, industry, and we'll pull together. But we've seen all of this happen before. Any new technology that comes out, think about the number of companies, of entities, of organizations that come out and say, look, we're doing all the new stuff. We're on the cutting edge. Yeah, that's normal. I mean, how many people have worked at companies where you've maybe had a marketing team say a few things that you really wish they hadn't? I had an experience where all of a sudden marketing created a new security boundary for a certain company I worked for that really didn't exist. These things happen. We deal with them all the time. Patching not being possible. I'll be honest, this one gave me a little heartburn. I come from a software background. Of course, you patch everything, right? Keep in mind, I've now been educated. I understand. We retrain the model, we re-release it. Life is good again. But then I started thinking about, I work in a hardware company. How many times do we release hardware and it's out there? There's nothing we can do. It's out for whatever good or bad is going to happen. Again, pretty normal stuff that we deal with. And loss of trust. Anytime you lose trust in a system, it's incredibly expensive or nearly impossible to get it back. You know, how do you prove a negative? How do you disprove a negative? Well, again, and I realize I'm starting to sound a little bit like a broken record up here. We've seen this before. Anybody remember 2015 and the super micro stuff that happened? Oh my God, we were all going to be spied on by servers at Amazon and Apple or wherever the heck it was. Got a lot of news uptake. Super micro, you know, they spun up their incident machine, may have lost a couple customers, but they're still in business. Their stock's been doing well. You think about just the things we've seen this year, the variety of ChatGPT, Chick-fil-A, and T-Mobile, repeatedly, having security breaches. And yet these companies are still around, they're still functioning, they haven't gone out of business. So again, we've seen all this before. What's old is new. And just remember, we've seen all this before. If you think about Photoshop's been around forever. We've been monkeying with things on the internet and making it so you can't believe what you see or what you hear. I saw when I was putting this together, the new TikTok, whatever, where it sounded like former President Barack Obama mentioning, the passing of his chef. This made a big outcry, but we've seen all this before. And so we've dealt with these vulnerabilities in the past, and we're going to continue seeing the same kinds of vulnerabilities in the future. Nothing new here. But I will say, who can you trust? Now, please forgive me. This is my first attempt at DALL-E. I don't think I'm quitting my day job. But what happens when these things go wrong? Think about if, I don't know, let's say Quora, is answering a question, it hallucinates, and the Google result says, you can melt eggs. Think about if, I don't know, Bing Chat starts hosting malware, or Amazon having to limit the number of books an author can publish a day because of the concerns of AI taking over. Hint, I know you all know this, but it's already happened. But in more than one way. We have been dealing with misinformation on the internet, I think, since day 2 of the internet, pretty much. We have been dealing with people making things up. We have been dealing with people trying to fake others out. There's nothing new here. Again, I know I'm sounding like the broken record, but that's the point. It's the same stuff we've dealt with already. Part of security's responsibility is to build trust in products and services. And if you think about the assumed implicit trust we've had in the past, it's going to have to change. The way we used to test and make sure something was real is going to have to change. We're going to need more explicit models to be able to determine these things. But again, the industry's already working on this. We're aware of this. You think about, I know we've got guardrails for large language models, to try and make sure it stays in the perimeters of its safety and security requirements so it doesn't spit out things we don't think are appropriate. And just a parting shot for those of you who might also be worried about privacy. Anybody see this on TikTok? Oh my God, at the end of privacy because a Taylor Swift fan account was doxing people on the internet, showing, oh, you had that picture, you're so-and-so and you work here. People were freaking out all over the place. But the thing is, information was already public. There was no surprise. The only difference is that AI made this easier and quicker. But anybody could have found this information and doxed folks, just not as efficiently. So what do? Like any good scouts, we prepare. You don't have to reinvent wheels. You start with what you know. You look at the relationships you have. the tools you have, the processes you have, your communications. You're going to see I'm big on communications here in a minute. So, for example, where have we started? Well, actually, NVIDIA's done pretty good about this. We initially start and go, okay, what are the roles and responsibilities we already have? Who's in legal? Who's in compliance? What part of security would respond to these sorts of things? Who in customer support do we need to make sure is aware of this? All those different things that we're already doing and we're prepared for. Don't forget your red team, your penetration testing folks. They too love looking for failure modes. They live on it. And it's so much easier and cheaper to fix things before they go out the door. So if you can find it and fix it and ship it, you're in a much better place. Secure development lifecycle and incident response lifecycle. I'm going to touch on this a little more in a minute, but basically these are established industry processes. They've been around for years. People utilize them to make things more safe and secure. And if you are someplace that isn't doing it yet, these resources are already public and are easy to find and use right off the bat. Crisis communications. I laugh because our head of corporate comms knows if I call him at 4:30 on a Friday, it's usually not going to be a good weekend. But what I've also done is we've got templates set up that we utilize whenever we have a problem that we start from, so we're not reinventing wheels again. We have a process in place. And our comms team knows that if something looks like it's going to blow up, we're going to raise our hands and say, hey, guys, we're concerned about this. But on the other side of that too is I'll also let them know, hey, I'm not going to lose any sleep over this on the weekend. We'll deal with this on Monday. So building those relationships. And then release management. I won't say which company it was, but there was a place I worked where nobody could explain to me how the product actually got out the door. It was software, I'll leave it at that. But I went to the 2 release managers and said, can you show me how this works? Because I kept hearing, oh yeah, we release hundreds of times a day. A bit of a hint there. And neither of them, they pulled up their systems. Oh, you just click this button. So to this day, I still don't know how the product I worked for over 2 years actually shipped. But so it goes. So I just want to touch on a minute, secure development lifecycle. Are you all familiar with SDL? A few? Okay. For those who aren't, the main point, don't worry about all the reading, it's all good, is that you try and, the term I love is bake security in throughout each step of the development process. So you think about it when you're designing the systems you're going to use to build your stuff. You think about it when you're building the code and testing it to make sure it actually does the things you expect and is secure against the things you don't want to have happen. One of the things that I love that we do is we've got an exception process. Now, basically, my experience, again, mostly software, is that you never ship perfect code. There's always something, hopefully not big, going out the door. Again, another place I worked, when we shipped a major product, which we'll leave nameless at this point, we were told we could not do anything less than a critical update for the first 3 months. Now, I can guarantee you there was plenty of other things that needed to be fixed, but we could not publicly fix anything that wasn't critical because it wouldn't have looked good for the product. This is going to help because now what happens is, hey, we know what's going out. We know that this, that, and the other we need to fix because there are always bugs coming in, right? But you make sure that you have somebody with the fiduciary responsibility of the company, somebody who can sign the check saying, yes, we agree, now is the time to ship. It's okay to ship with this risk to it. Because you're never going to ship perfect code. And if you want to stay in business, you have to ship product, right? The other thing I want to touch on real quick is the incident response lifecycle. Basically, it's the, hey, come here, report our vulnerabilities to us. For us, that's our pcert@nvidia.com. Please feel free to use it if you find anything in our stuff. We look and analyze and we make sure, is this really a bug or is this a misunderstanding? The engineering teams work on it. We get the fixes ready. We then let customers know how they need to protect themselves. And then we have this feedback loop. And I couldn't get the drawing quite right, but there's actually two feedback loops. There's the feedback loop for the process, are we doing what the finders need us to do? Is the engineering team getting it? Do we need to make any automations? Do we need to make things better? But the more important feedback we do is we do what's called a root cause corrective action. What went wrong? How did we miss this? Not only that, where in that development process from before could we have caught it earlier? So it may be we need to go back and look at the threat model and make sure it's up to date. It may be we need to do some training for folks to make sure they're coding more securely. It may be we need new QA tests, quality assurance tests, to make sure we catch this. But we go back for each and every incident and we check and we make sure that we have this because, again, it's cheaper to fix things before they go out the door. And once my teams are getting a hold of it, that's when it's starting to cost more money. The other cool thing we have, how many folks are familiar with OWASP? Excellent. So you all know about this. Don't worry about reading through all this. This is just kind of showing how we've got different buckets of top 10 vulnerabilities and risks. And they did come out with, oops, there went her mouth. There we go. Try that again. I was going to get this through this a little more smoothly. There we go. All good. They came out with the large language model this year. So now I know there are other kinds of models, and this is where they've started, which is great. But the main point I want you to see here, see all the lines going across? A lot of what we've seen in the past, we're still seeing now in AI and machine learning. Same kinds of vulnerabilities. People not ACLing things right. Injections. These are all similar things we've dealt with. So again, sound kind of boring. Not much new here. Now, what is new is how you have to iterate. So for us, we had a pretty robust security process. And when we started getting into AI, we went, ooh, okay, we gotta prepare for this. And so we started looking at our secure design lifecycle to start. And we went through and we worked with the AI teams and the engineers and whatnot and tried to figure out what else would we need to do to assure the security of something that's going out the door. Well, we have two separate AI SDLs, if you will, one for models and one for data sets. It's a small thing, but it makes a difference. Harm versus vulnerability. This is incredibly important because I think, as I mentioned earlier, people panic. But for security, if it's not affecting confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability, it's not really in the security bucket most of the times. But there are some horrible things that can come out of a large language model or the things, a result you did not intend, that you still would need to address in one way or another. Whether you're fixing it or talking about it, you need to have that prep. And so for us, while we made those distinctions very clear on how we do it, it all goes through our PCERT at nvidia.com. So we handle any ethics concerns, any bias concerns, any vulnerability concerns come in, and we've posted that on our public website saying, hey, if you found something, we're here. Threat intelligence, incredibly important. You may need to look for new sources of threat intel. So this can be a new vendor that you're hiring who's keeping an eye on the dark webs and seeing what all the bad folks are up to. It could be coming to wonderful places like this to see what's developing, to have those communities. Or it could be other ops trust groups, so groups that are based on, hey, I know Hiram, you can trust him, and Hiram gets let in, and we can have these sorts of discussions. And then tabletop exercises. I have a love-hate relationship with tabletop exercises. Are you all familiar? This is we're going to run through and practice this and make sure everything's working. Every time they come to me and say, Shawn, we got to run a tabletop. I'm like, I've got 10 things going on over here. Can you just pick one of those and just run through it and mark your document? I was wrong. The cool thing about tabletops is it allows you to practice for things you haven't had happen yet. Of course, we're good at running day-to-day stuff. What happens when this new stuff comes out? Are we ready? Do we have everything done? And see, the interesting thing was we actually did go through this. We came up with this great playbook. Here's how we're going to handle AI and when an incident comes up. And we had our first incident. It wasn't a real incident, we discovered, but it was enough to hit the red button and run the playbook. And it took us a couple days to realize nothing was affected. This wasn't a big deal. And we went, oh, that took a lot longer than we expected. So we iterated. We cleaned up the playbook. We made some improvements on how we do things. And so a couple weeks later, somebody had gotten a question late on a Tuesday night. And we were all like, is that data leak? Uh-oh. So we hit the big red button. Keep in mind, for most security people, I would much rather you hit that big red button and have us have a false positive and we spin up and make sure everything's cool versus, I don't want to bother anybody. And then I've got a forest fire to deal with on Monday. So we hit the big red button. We ran the incident. As soon as we got everybody in the room, went, oh, nope, not a data leak. Here's why. Oh, great. But we thought, wow, what if this had been an actual emergency? How would we have run that? So we're meeting and creating and iterating on that playbook. Every time we have an incident like this, we make sure we get some learning out of it. We make sure that we do it better for next time. Then there's the human factor. So we've talked about the processes and tools and whatnot. Training the engineers. One of the things that we're doing a lot of work with right now is making sure the engineers understand what does an AI situation look like and how to avoid coding into one. We're doing trainings with teams on how they can safely use different models internally. I know there has been some concerns and legitimately that if I'm testing something, I don't want to put my intellectual property into the question or my code or any of that nature because I don't know where it's going or who's going to have access to those logs. Legitimate concerns. Engagement processes. This is where I told you I get into that communication stuff. We make sure, as I said, for us, you come to PCERT. Same front door for everything. If you got anything of a security or even smells like security, you come to us. Other places may want to do it differently. So how are you going to have that engagement? How are people going to know how to reach out to you? Who's going to come knocking at the door? And then building relationships. This is, I think, one of the strongest things I can really beat on today. Not just the internal relationships. Do you know who in legal you'd go to? Do you know who's the head of your customer support who might need to know and who's getting these questions? Who from compliance are you going to need to pull in? Having, not only knowing who those people are, where they sit and what their scope is incredibly important. But also the external folks. You think about any vendors, partners, it's incredibly important to have those relationships first. I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, not having that trust and being in the middle of an incident, you're having to build it really fast. We've got good relationships. We know who the main PCERTs are at all of our different partners and whatnot. But there are times occasionally I have to go knocking on LinkedIn's door. Hi, I'm Shawn Richardson. I run cyber operations for NVIDIA. Can I get you on a phone line, please? I'm actually pretty lucky. For some reason, people will respond. Maybe, it's the manatee stories. I'm not sure. But it takes time. I got to find the right person. And it may be somebody from somebody from somebody. When you're in the middle of an incident, every moment counts. So having those relationships established. And it also helps in other situations. We had, at one place I worked, we had been dealing with a finder who was unhappy in how things were handled. And while he did not zero-day us, he certainly had a lot to say on his blog afterwards about how poorly it had been run. Legitimately, he had concerns. And I saw this, and of course, everyone's like, oh, they're bad-mouthing us. It's like, well, we kind of had it coming. That wasn't NVIDIA, by the way, just to be clear. But so I went, oh, he works at company Z. I know they had a PCERT over there. And so I called and I said, hey, can I set up a meeting with your guy? Because he was absolutely dead on. And I want to talk to him about what changes we're making to make sure this doesn't happen again. Now, the interesting result was Apparently the company was unaware of the blog that had gone out. Always make sure you have your PR and comms sign off on things, even if you're not technically speaking for the company. And they made him pull it down, which wasn't my ask, but from corporate standpoint, they were happy to see that gone. I was trying to do the right thing and make sure the guy knew what was going on, but good things still came out of it. And then we've got industry preparedness. This is where you all come in. This is where we need your help. Following coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Who here knows what CVD is? Got a couple hands. Okay. Just to be clear, coordinated vulnerability disclosure is when I find something in your product, I'm going to reach out to you and let you know about it. And I'm going to give you time to fix it. Now, in software today, we have a standard 90 days from when something is found to when the person is kind of cool to talk about it. We don't have that standard yet for AI. And remember, I mentioned the no patching part. That's true, but think of it this way. The model is just 20% of what's going on there. There's a whole the whole 80% of the system that I may be able to patch. Do this on hardware all the time. And so I need the time, and sometimes it takes a little more time to figure out how to make that adjustment because you're affecting something out in the physical world. And think about it this way too. Even if I don't or can't fix it, giving me that time to prepare so I will be able to respond and not be caught back-footed is incredibly important. These are kind of the community standards that security teams have come up with. This is kind of how we know how to set expectations with each other. You know what your SLA is for this. You know what it's that. And I know people get excited when they find things, but we really need you following through on this. And not because somebody wants to keep something hidden, although I have seen that happen. There was a researcher a couple years ago who a certain government was trying to shut him down because he had reported research. Most places you go, though, they understand CVD and aren't going to threaten you with lawsuit. MITRE CVE. So MITRE are the folks who give us the common vulnerability enumerator, the number we use to track vulnerabilities across industry. Currently, they still don't have any guidance on AI vulnerabilities. Now they're working on it. So a couple of us have talked to the board and said, hey, are you all thinking about this? And gratefully, they've started. Are they going to CVE harms? Kind of hope not, but maybe they'll find a reason to do that. How are they going to define this? How are they going to manage this? How are they going to educate us on how we work with their? Mentioned first.org earlier, and yeah, I'm a huge fan. There is a group called the AI Security Special Interest Group. Now, you do not need to be a member of FIRST to join. They do vet folks. So if you go out to the website and you go, hey, this is something I might be interested in, come grab me today or tomorrow and let's talk. I told them I was going to be mentioning this to you all, and they're like, great, let us know who wants to join. So if that's something you're interested in, forewarned though, is that they need active participation. So you can't just sit in on the phone calls and listen and kind of just lurk. They want to hear what you're presenting. They want to hear about what you're thinking about. No secret sauce stuff. It's none of that stuff. But what are we doing as an industry to prepare? Bug Bounty Community of Interest is a group of folks who run bug bounty programs across the industries. This group started right as COVID was hitting. And basically because some companies do it better than others, but there's still lots of learning. Bug bounties are hard. They certainly shouldn't be used to replace your quality assurance testing. And so they've come up with a platform of kind of how you run these programs. Great. They're now starting to look at, well, wow, how do we do this for AI? How do you run an AI bug bounty program? How do you run an AI bias program? Oh, so we've called in a couple of our folks, people who've been involved with the AI Village at DEF CON. Thank you all so much for your hard work on that. And we're trying to see how do we not necessarily replicate, but how do we iterate on that so that we can run these for enterprise organizations? Some things to think about. And of course, our friends from OWASP. if you go out to their website, they're always looking for volunteers who can help come up with the next top 10. So if this is something you're passionate about, definitely check it out, see what you can contribute. Because the trick of this is it's going to take all of us working together to keep the ecosystem more secure and to be ready to respond. So I've got my summary up here of my 5 lessons learned. The thing I'm going to say is there are 3 things. I'm going to try not to hit that again. 3 things that if you remember nothing else, that you walk out of this meeting in. 1, follow coordinated vulnerability disclosure. If you can't figure out who to reach, ask your friends. Go out to first.org. They've got a list of all of their companies that are members. Hit up CertCC if you're US based. It doesn't work all the time, but you're making the effort. Number 2, build those trust relationships now. Make sure that you have that trust built in before you need to draw on it. And number 3, it wasn't mentioned here, don't forget the fundamentals. I think I saw that CISA and NSA came up with their list of things that they're seeing that even mature organizations are doing wrong. I can't tell you the number of S3 buckets open to the internet we've had to deal with. I shake my head every time I see an incident spun up because somebody put a password or a key someplace they shouldn't have, or hard-coded it where it shouldn't be. Following those best practices, doing the basic things. We still don't have that part nailed. And frankly, that's what keeps me up at night more than all the new stuff coming, because I've got a process. I'll work through that. But getting people's hearts and minds and cultures to change so that they actually do the things that they should be doing up front, kind of a hard thing to change. So, and with that, I want to thank you all for your attention this morning. I want to thank all the folks who helped me prepare for this, you who are in the audience. I also want to thank my grandfather, Dick Donegan, who may be watching. Hi, Dick. My 97-year-old grandfather. He's on that board at Moat Marine, that place I used to volunteer at. And he is working with them to get AI into everything. He wants it in their research, in their marketing, in their fundraising. I'm not quite sure how all that's going to work. But he's excited. And it gives me hope because here's somebody who has seen 97. He's seen a lot of technological changes over the years. And while he's aware of the dark side, as we all see, he's more excited about the stuff that's going to come out of this. And so I want to thank him for being an inspiration to me. And to my husband, Patrick, who has unfortunately had to listen to me repeatedly go over this talk over and over again while I've been in my office. So thank you all very much. If you have any questions, I'm here. I think we still got a few minutes left and would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn.
Yep.
Thank you, Shawn. If you're like me. Okay, are we live? Thank you, Shawn. If you're like me, then it wasn't until, in your early career, you didn't have a lot of experience with incident response part of security. So this is a unique CAMLIS first to have this perspective here. I know we're gonna have some questions, but I wanna, you spoke so much about what is the same, Shawn, and I wanna ask 2 questions for me before we turn over the audience about what is different. Okay. The first is the time. We're in a transient state of adjusting to software now being developed that uses AI. What does the time to remediate look like now? And how do you suspect it will settle as we get into a steady state of handling sort of AI in software applications?
That's a great question, Hiram. I mean, we've talked about, not quite sure where to stand where I'm out of your way.
This way.
We've talked about, there's that industry standard of 90 days and SLAs. But even that, over the years, I've been kind of keeping an eye out and going, I know some places that would say 45. If you send something into CCERT, they will respond back with 60 days, but that's only if you don't actually respond. I think we're going to be looking at that time really shrink. I think because the expectations are getting more concerned. I think that as this is more and more everywhere, the risks are going to be a little higher. So we can't just sit on something for 90 days and hope the bad folks, the malicious folks aren't utilizing it. I think we're going to see that accelerate quite a bit. I don't know where we're going to land. We've seen some of the examples with how the cloud vulnerability SLAs have been coming down, depending on what it is, days to hours to try and get things fixed. I think the thing I think about is, when a patch gets released, and I realize this is the software side of the house, but it used to be you had a couple of days, a week before the malicious proofs of concept came out, and now it's hours. And so you don't have a lot of time to get patched. So these are all the things that are kind of at our top of mind, and we're going to have to figure out.
A related question is the tooling. So the tooling for discovering, for mitigating in this transient state that we're in, where do you see us now? Are we needing to invent slightly new parts of that? And will we settle in something that's more familiar?
That's a great question. I'll be honest, I don't know for sure. I think we are, you all have been doing research on this for a while. This AI is not new to you. You all are building careers, you're writing research papers. It's kind of for the rest of us that AI is a little newer. So, as I've said, you all have seen all this. You've all heard all this. But I do see, we initially, I think, took the tools that we had and tried to throw them at the problem. And we're iterating on that. So I'm now seeing like our threat hunting teams and our incident response teams looking at how they can use different tools to make this quicker, to make response easier. I know we've got some things that we're, as we used to say at Microsoft, eating our own dog food internally on at NVIDIA. But I think there's going to be some iterations. I think we're going to have some bumps in the road. But I think the tools we're going to see are going to be based upon processes that we kind of do now, but figure out how do we speed that up? How do we be more sophisticated in that tooling going forward?
Excellent. We have a microphone that's available for audience questions. For those on the live stream, if you'll drop questions in the Slack channel, we can also respond to those. Are there any questions from the audience before I ask some more of mine? Go ahead.
Hello. So for those who've worked in dependability and security, common mode failure is very fascinating. And with AI ML, what I think is quite particularly interesting is identifying what part of the model. So the model isn't just the algorithm, it's the system interaction, the software, the data, the hardware, the network. And trying to figure out what common mode failure really matters towards your deployment. So vulnerabilities across the transformer architecture, or is it how it manifests and interacts with the NVIDIA architecture? It's very complicated from what we found ourselves. So I kind of want to get your opinion on, if you are looking at common mode vulnerabilities, common mode failure within ML, where is the big pain points, or is it kind of a big mosaic of problems?
It's funny. I think our instincts is to start with the simple stuff, to start with the things we know. Where is the lowest common denominator that I can potentially fix this at the cheapest, frankly, easiest part? Because if I'm sitting here and saying, oh no, we got to re-architecture this on the other side, I've got the business unit looking at me and going, we got to do what? How long is that going to take? These developers are working over here. I can't spare them for this new thing you've got coming up. So I think it's, again, we don't know. I've seen things come in. We had a hardware vulnerability a couple of years ago, and it took a while to figure out where in the structure the problem was. And then even longer to figure out, how do we address it? Or how can we best address it? Because again, being hardware, we couldn't perfectly address it, but how do we put those mitigations in place? And I think it's going to be trial and error. I really do. And depending on the technology and depending upon the business requirements to some extent. Good question. Thank you.
There's one more right here.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Shawn. There was a point in your presentation where I inferred you're a little bit blasé about we've got this. We've got this. We're practiced at this. We know this. This new thing is going to come along. I suspect back in the CERT that you and your team are not blasé about this. So I'm not taking that liberty. But I think the key there is the thing that worries people is there's a part of this that's going to be new. right? So you're right. A lot of this is, well, if we do the best practices, if we do the things we've always done, we will get our arms around this. But everything brings something new. Sometimes we know what that is, sometimes we don't know. So I'm curious from your past experience, where were those things, or an example, or even just a story of something that came new where all the things that you were doing weren't ready for it? And because I think that's what people are worried about with the AI stuff, is it seems so into outer space that there's all this new stuff. It's gonna, all the old stuff's not gonna work.
That is a
Thanks for
great
taking the
question.
time.
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. Two things. One, I've been incident response for almost 20 years. My husband puts it inappropriately that I've been shot at a lot. I've had my emails posted by hackers on hacker forums. I have had my name used in news articles about something that went wrong. I can't sustain this career if I panic every time something new comes up. You can't last as an incident responder. The stress will get to be too much. So while I'm sounding a little blasé about it, it's because, yep, another fire. Okay, great. Here's what we do. And you have to follow that process, because otherwise you're just going to burn out. The other side, though, to say, there's concerns. There's stuff that we know we're not ready for. There's stuff that's going to happen, and it's happening so quickly. And it's coming from all these different directions. And you don't know where it's going to come from. But again, having that repeatable process, I'm not going to go off and create something completely new for a new technology. I'm going to go, okay, this is new. I'm going to pull my AI folks into the room and go, tell me what I really need to be scared of here. This is new to us. Where's the downsides? What are we concerned with here? And that's what we're doing, is, we're pulling in the brains, you all, to see where we need to prep and where we need to be ready for these things, because they're going to happen. But the thing of it is, it's kind of like with breaches. I'm sure a lot of you may have heard that we got hit by a breach a year or so ago. It's that, how quick do you respond? How quick do you stand back up? Everybody's going to get hit. It happens, but how do you get up the next day and keep going and keep producing and keep sending out product and keep dealing with your customers? That's how we move forward.
Got a little bit of I guess, a nuanced question, which is, and one that hopefully doesn't really have an answer. What do you think the role is for, let's say, disciplines like network security, and a lot of, say, for instance, with your guys' Mellanox acquisition and everything, a lot of in-network compute and acceleration that you guys have there, as well as some other vendors? When does the responsibility kind of rest also with using those acceleration, mechanisms and looking at things like that?
That's a great question. And I realize this is going to sound like a pretty juvenile answer perhaps, but security is everybody's business. Every person at NVIDIA, security is their responsibility. And that's whether they're sending something out or accessing something. Everybody goes through security training. Everybody is considered responsible. That being said, you mentioned our NBU team. We've worked very closely to develop their incident response side of the house. They know their technology better than I do. But again, I've got this process, this framework. God, I sound like a broken record this morning. And I've pulled them into it in a way that works for how they do their business. Because I can't say, all right, every engineer, you're going to follow what I do. I've tried doing that before. It doesn't really work. But I go out and I see how people are doing their work. And I figure out how I place myself in that, how we get our teams, how we get that incident response, how we get security in there. Back at Microsoft, when SDL was first coming out, and we were you had to follow all these rules or you couldn't ship. And I mean, it was brutal security. Nobody wanted to see security at their door because something bad was happening. And I won't mention who I followed, but she had gone through and basically, you have a carrot and a stick when you're dealing with these things. And she had basically taken that stick and beat the Windows team to death. And management finally went, we're done. we're not doing this anymore. We're following this route. So I spent a whole cycle just getting their trust back. And it didn't do any good to try and force yourself into something that doesn't work for an engineering team or doesn't work for a research team. You got to figure out how to work together and figure out what is that direction you're trying to get to. What is the end result you're trying to get to, and how do you work together? One thing I didn't mention earlier that I meant to is that cyber operations at NVIDIA is kind of a virtual team. I mean, I've got my part with my teams, but we also have virtual folks in the infrastructure security side of things. Because if you think about, for us, our services are sometimes part of our infrastructure. Whose is it? Who's got that ball? So we've worked together. We've also determined that we've got different kinds of responsibilities and different kinds of strengths across the different teams. So even if it's something that's affecting one team, it may be the PCERT team who's not involved, who's taking care of the communications, because that's where they can contribute. So I feel like I've kind of gone round a way to say it's everybody, and we go from there. God, I have to admit, my fear was going to be I'd stand up here and they'd say, "Are there any questions?" And you'd all just be quiet. So thank you.
That's not our way.
I appreciate that. This is a wonderful group.
Quick question. So since you've been through a few of these social moments, any recommendations for handling those conversations and business sees something new and shiny, they see a potential revenue opportunity. We don't necessarily understand all the risk around it.
Mm-hmm.
Any tips for handling that conversation and framing it well?
Yes, absolutely. I think where I have seen the most success is where I've gone to the business unit and said, here's what we know. I try and give them as much of the information as I can and where I see the risk so that they can make those business decisions. It's not my job to make the call, but it is theirs. I empower them to hopefully make the right call. Now, I have to admit, if I feel like they're starting to go off the road over here, I may call in people like Daniel and others to kind of escalate so I can have bigger dog to bigger dog conversations. My goal is not to stop people from shipping or researching or finding vulnerabilities. It is to empower them to try and do it in the way that's going to least hurt end users, customers, partners, so that we get, all of us kind of going up at the same time. Good question. Thank you.
So Shawn, as the first speaker of the day, you get the first online question as well. So there's a question on the Slack that says, are there any practical detections for ML attacks from a security operations point of view, Sigma, Yara, et cetera?
I'll be real upfront. I am not the super technical person in AI at the company. I certainly know who to go and ask those questions of. I think, the point is, again, the relationship stuff I mentioned earlier, if I can sidestep the question a little bit, is knowing who knows those questions. We have teams that are looking at different things. We have teams that are building different things to try and secure ourselves more broadly. And we're sharing some of that stuff externally. So again, all coming together and trying to make it for more secure.
And if you'd like to meet those people, they include, Adam and Sven and Hiram, and there are others here that deal exactly in that area. Okay.
Oh, she's getting a little bit of a workout this morning.
Sorry, I was slow to get up, meet you halfway. I share your pain regarding tabletop scenarios. What, in your experience running tabletop scenarios about, say, AI or ML things, you found are the most valuable scenarios that bring the most cross-disciplinary engagement from the comms and the legal and the other people that you mentioned?
A couple things. Number one, trying to, talking to my AI folks and go, where should I be scared? Kind of where are the examples? What is the research you all are doing potentially that may cause that technology blip that I need to address? Making sure people know it's a tabletop. The first one of these we ran, they did it as a surprise to the teams. Now I've seen other companies do that where their red team goes after their blue team and they don't know it's the red team. And you can get some value out of that, but you're also spinning up your blue team. Not a very nice thing to do. I love my red team guys. They're very thoughtful on how they do things. Blue team's got to be right 100% of the time. Red team's only got to be right once. So that making sure people are aware. And then in all honesty, kind of selling them on it. So I mentioned earlier that we had that incident that wasn't an incident. Well, the engineering team and the business team were like, hey, what happened here? Excellent, great. We're going to have this meeting over here. We really want you to come. Here's the benefit you're going to get out of this. And that I think is the important thing, is helping others understand. I can sit here and talk all day till I'm blue in the face about how this is necessary. But explaining to my comms person, explaining to my compliance person who's looking at SOC 2 stuff or whatever, where it's benefit to them and selling them on that.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for maybe just one more question here.
So with like a lot of the AI tools, the excitement is like we're lowering the bar for people to start using them. So like ChatGPT, people started using this at work before like the companies really thought if this was a good idea. So I'm curious, in like your more traditional experience, how well has like response process been able to manage risks like shadow IT, where you know, if machine learning is becoming more available, maybe shadow ML is going to start being more of a problem. Like do these kind of response processes based around secure development, are they able to handle these risks when you have someone that did something and they have never heard of secure development?
Not 100% of the time. I can't catch everything, but you know, we look at how we have the processes in place. We also have, I think, an incredible threat operations team. For a company that isn't technically selling security, we have some very strong people. And we are able to kind of work together, again, kind of a virtual team of how we keep those things and keep an eye on those things. And again, we're always learning. You know, keep an eye on what the malicious users are doing, what's happening with our peers. And again, kind of, if not necessarily tabletoping it, going, oh man, how would we look for that? You know, you see something kind of in the dark web and you're like, okay, we got to prep for that. It's happening over here. How are we going to address it? Awesome.
We'd like to thank our keynote speaker, Shawn Richardson. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
We're going to adjourn for a break and reassemble for our next session that will begin at 10:25 promptly. There's in the break room to the side here, I think you'll find everything you need to take a break. And again, the restrooms are down the hall. Anything else? Sorry.